Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, January 10th. We're into the double digits now of January. January 10th, 2023. Time for another year at this point. I'm tired of this one already. I'm not writing checks these days anyhow, so there's not even any comedic value in it. Let's just go straight to 2024 and see what happens, I guess. I think probably people fear that because it's a quote-unquote election year. I don't know whether we're going to have one or whether it's going to count or any of that kind of stuff. But we'll wait and see. We're watching what's happening in Brazil and wondering what the hell's going on, and exactly how that even got motivated to get started with Bolsonaro here in the United States. And apparently hospitalized. Is that the case? I thought I read yesterday that he was hospitalized. I have no idea what that might be about. I also saw a rumor this morning via Mastodon that, which one was it? Was it Diamond of Diamond and Silk has had been rumored to have contracted COVID in November and is now dead. And it's not clear entirely whether it was COVID that is to blame, although it seems fairly likely. She was unvaccinated after all, and these things happen, but I guess it's not entirely confirmed. I don't know. I don't want to start the irresponsible rumor. It's only irresponsible of me not to tell you that there is such a rumor. You see, this is the press excuse for all of this. All right. Well, plenty happening. The Republicans did in fact pass their whatchamahoozy. What do you call that thing again? Rules package. Which we went over yesterday in some detail. And I think you were probably, if you're listening, largely prepared for that. Although many of you were unable to listen to it earlier than you found other news reports about it because real life intervened yesterday. And a series of meetings that took me away during what is normally the editing and posting hours meant that the show didn't get posted until very late in the afternoon, early evening. And so apologies for all of that, of course, but that's the way life is. And, when the show is kind of I wouldn't say it's a passing hobby, but it doesn't generate a great deal of income. That is true. And it's not the main source for the family. So, other aspects of life intervene. Plus, of course, other aspects of life, like civic duties, which actually bore the responsibility for the bulk of what I had to spend the time on yesterday. But, in fact, I've mentioned before, the presidency of the temple is what have I mentioned it before? I think I must have. It's such an over large part of the way I have to spend my time these days. But anyway, a lot of work that had to be done, and not all of it can be spent monkeying around with the podcast as much as we try. But apologies for not getting that out sooner. And most days, if I'm really, truly disciplined, I could probably have gotten it out and finished before I had to head off to the meetings. But then I stopped for coffee and stuff like that. Oh, you know how it goes. So I apologize. Anyway, if you haven't heard enough about rules, we can talk more about it. Today is Tuesday. Joan McCarter, I believe, will be with us in the last segment of the show. She may want to talk about rules. She may want to be looking forward to the other disasters that are coming because of the rules, but we'll see. Lots of other things to catch up with. I guess I'll have to start by acknowledging the very annoying headlines of yesterday, and then we could discuss a little bit. Maybe Greg will want to do this tomorrow. Discuss the criticism of the media's approach to, you probably guessed already, the story involving classified information turned up at Joe Biden's office that he held at a think tank in between his vice presidency and presidency, which of course would be pounced on by Republicans as saying, see, everybody does it. And of course there are quantum differences between them. I think you've probably already heard what those differences are. Chief among them, of course, when you come across classified material, and you're Joe Biden or Joe Biden's attorneys, as in this case, as they were packing things up, one, you come across classified material that's being stored as securely as possible, given that it's not on a governmental site. So for one thing, the papers were where they were supposed to be, and they were, I think, actually access to them was controlled, and they were locked up, etc. But even so, they were at least in the envelopes that they were supposed to be in. Not necessarily the case with all of the materials found at Mar-a-Lago, and of course that kept in haphazard fashion. The real issue, of course, well, two issues. One was that there was no control over access to the information at Mar-a-Lago, whereas there appears to have been in Biden's office. And two, when the government became aware of the presence of these materials, what happens? Well, in the Joe Biden case, the government is not aware of the missing material beforehand and is informed by Joe Biden's office that they have it and are prepared to turn it over immediately. Whereas, if you leave it for the government to discover, hey, something's missing first, and then they ask you for it, and you say no, or I won't give it to you, or make me, or I don't have it, or it's not classified, and you make them wait for a year, you're likely to be in a different kind of trouble than Biden would have been, or than Biden might be, simply because he has the things. You're not supposed to have it. That's the bottom line. When they discover that you have it, if they tell you to return it, you return it, then you're probably going to be able to walk away from that. But that doesn't mean the news media is going to be able to walk away from this stuff. So we'll have to wait and see how they play this. And the fact is that apparently CNN spent like the full hour of whatever time, I guess it's an hour, allotted to Anderson Cooper and the other evening programs obsessing over this thing. And doesn't this show that it's both sides? And, you could have, if you have an hour, you can, if you have 5 minutes, you can spend it saying, well, there are actually some considerable differences here, and maybe we ought to talk about them. All right. So we've got that. There are a couple other things that I would like to cover with you. It occurs to me, did I read these things? I don't know if I shared them online, on Mastodon, et cetera. Still a lot of enthusiasm. Oh, where's my, sound effect, right?
Enthusiasm.
Right, exactly. In fact, multiple enthusiasms for the, camera coverage in the House chamber when the coverage was left up through a gap in the rules to ESPN, C-SPAN. They should have had ESPN covering it. That would have been much more exciting and probably much more interesting to more people than what we did get to see. But lots of great camera angles that were available because the usual rules, House rules, I guess. I mean, I'm told. I haven't actually I don't know that I've ever run across these rules in my reading of the House rules. I don't think I've ever read the House rules cover to cover. And I've just never had reason to go research the rules on camera coverage in the House. But those who claim to know say that in the absence of an adopted set of House rules, that C-SPAN cameras were free to operate as they saw fit, which may always be the case when it's C-SPAN cameras in the chamber. I don't know for sure. But one, that the ordinary coverage with House-owned cameras and C-SPAN being restricted to the use of that was not the situation when the speaker votes were still going on. And I mentioned to you that although we really liked the camera angles, and they were in fact informative, there are good substantive reasons to have those additional camera angles, those better camera angles available. There was a wrinkle to it that I think most people aren't considering. And despite my efforts on social media to try and spread the word about those things, it hasn't quite happened. And I thought I might take a minute or two to read you some of the articles that described the situation last time there was such a fight, so that you could get a sense of what I was talking about. I had basically told you, though, that while it's boring and wrote, when government employees control the government-owned, house-owned cameras, and you produce boring angles, and it's because they don't want to, reveal everything, I guess. I mean, that's one argument. They don't want to reveal everything or show other members when they're caught unaware on camera, etc. There's some consideration to be given to that. But at any rate, the main thing was that government-operated, government-owned cameras produced government-owned, not really, but because it was government-produced video, there was no copyright in it, and it's public domain video. Public domain information, as it should be, because they are, of course, public proceedings. And it's troublesome when you have C-SPAN doing the shooting, and C-SPAN has, at least in the past, has had a troublesome habit of claiming that, hey, if it's our cameras and we're the ones making the choices and doing the shooting, we ought to own the copyright in the product. And it's difficult, too, because this is not hard to, it's hard to imagine, on the one hand, that C-SPAN ought to be able to own this stuff, and maybe it ought to be viewed differently, and it should be a non-profit. I don't know if it's organized as a non-profit or not. I don't even know now that I think about it. But you think that they're producing public information, but they think of it very differently. They think of themselves as a business, and rightly so. I mean, I think that's the difficulty. We can't say that they're wrong about that. I mean, we would say about a still photographer from the AP or the Washington Post or whomever, wherever, if they show up at the press gallery and enter the House chamber in the press galleries up top and take some pictures of whatever it is, or, whether it's in or around or in a hearing or anything like that, when AP takes the photo, AP owns the photo, or at least, and it's credited to the photographer and all that stuff. But it doesn't happen that way for C-SPAN, at least not in the popular imagination. People sort of think of what's on people think of what's on C-SPAN as in the public domain. C-SPAN doesn't necessarily. So I thought I would read you these two pieces. One, I'll start with an actual article from ZDNet, and then I will give you a blog entry from someone mixed up in the same situation from, again, back in 2007. How have things evolved since then? It's not entirely clear, but you'll see kind of where they left it in 2007 and see whether you think the issue is settled. From ZDNet.com, who owns congressional video? Public or C-SPAN? Good question, right? Now, this subheader sets up the situation here. And it was an unclear one and a weird one. Ready? The subheader in this, by the way, written by Richard Koman, Koman, the contributor to ZDNet at the time, and I don't know where he is these days. It's quite a while ago. So who owns congressional video, public or C-SPAN? Republicans accuse Pelosi of stealing C-SPAN owned material. Now, C-SPAN clarifies, floor debates are public. Hearings are owned by the cable network. Confused? That's the subheader. Well, let's see where we were in 2007 with this. Who owns video footage of Congress? The public or C-SPAN? It turns out both. But this copyright question was clarified in typical Washington sniping. And of course, it is kind of typical, but then it's also dismissed that way. Typical Washington sniping. No, an important thing is happening here. The issue exploded when Nancy Pelosi launched a blog, The Gavel. And those of you who've been around forever might even remember The Gavel. Again, this is 2007. So what are we talking about here? Not 20 years ago, but 15. A little less, or a little more, I guess. I don't know. Which direction does math work? Does anybody know? Anyway, and those of you who've been around forever, maybe in the Netroots or online or from Daily Kos might remember. I think it was Jesse Lee was largely responsible for the content of The Gavel, as I recall. He came over from the DCCC into Pelosi's office, and there were others, of course, who pushed for its establishment and provided a lot of the content, who worked in Pelosi's office. But Jesse Lee really made a kind of a career of Netroots and online digital engagement for government offices where he worked. Well, at any rate, the gavel started, and guess what? They decided, I think rather rationally, if you had decided to help start the speaker's blog, the gavel, you too might have decided to feature video of House floor debate. As the New York Times reported, when they did this, when they posted House floor video, Republicans rushed in and accused her of copyright infringement, claiming that Pelosi lifted the videos from C-SPAN. And she probably did. And my recollection is, of course, at the time, they were very proud of having put together a video engine on their website where you could search their archives, view live footage, and you could clip pieces of the House proceedings from their coverage that you could use to illustrate various things. And I started to do the same sort of thing at Congress Matters to try to explain what happened and show people what happened. And I used C-SPAN's footage because it was the only one that was available on an online video editor where you could grab these things. Otherwise, you could set up your own rather expensive and complex in-house system to constantly monitor C-SPAN on television and record it a 24/7 on a DVR and rip your own video, etc. And plenty of Jed Lewison did that, but it was a major undertaking. They were using something that C-SPAN held out as being available to everyone. And remember also that when it was House floor video, that's video shot by government-owned, government-operated cameras. What C-SPAN does with it is slap their little C-SPAN Chiron and bug on it and pump it out via cable television and, of course, their website. So when you grab video of floor activity from their website, they've, superimposed their C-SPAN logo on it, but it is, after all, a government proceeding, and lo and behold, the people working in the Speaker's office thought that it might be usable and of interest and legal for them to show people what happened in the House of Representatives the day before. Apparently, C-SPAN disagreed, at least briefly, and so did Republicans. Now, as it turns out, to return to the ZDNet, one of Pelosi's videos was, in fact, C-SPAN property. But, actually, I should say here, there's a little bit of reporting here. As the New York Times reported from the time, Republicans rushed in, and accused Pelosi of copyright infringement, claiming that Pelosi lifted the videos from C-SPAN. And I guess this from the New York Times report. Shortly after the news release was distributed by email, C-SPAN corrected the record. They came forward to say that House and Senate floor debates are government works. They now consider them, anyway, government works, shot by government-owned cameras, because that's how their government works, and thus in the public domain. The Republican committee, remember these days when they would do such a thing? The Republican committee promptly sent out a news release to withdraw the accusation against Pelosi's office. Amazing, right? Although someone did rightly point out this was pre-Obama, and this would be the days when Republicans did stuff like this, like, hey, we were actually wrong about something. Maybe we shouldn't have said that. But then, of course, Obama got elected, and oh my God, he was a black guy, so therefore nothing matters anymore. So anyway, that was somebody else's observation. I don't know if I would necessarily characterize it that way, but it's worth thinking about, I thought, and so I repeated it. All right, now back to the reporting from ZDNet. As it turns out, though, one of Pelosi's videos was C-SPAN property, shot by C-SPAN cameras at a House committee where Pelosi testified. She had been, I think, testifying about global warming before one or another of the committees. And I think this was the first, committee or subcommittee that was actually going to be doing some continuing substantive work on climate change, I think. And this was part of the rules package that they had recently passed. And she was just sort of marking that occasion. Anyway, so that's an interesting twist as well, right? At the time, the committees weren't all streaming video of their own meetings. They basically, I think very quickly after this confrontation decided we need to be able to have our own government controlled cameras and government produced video feed for everybody so that we don't run into this with C-SPAN, and there won't be the argument, well, if it isn't C-SPAN cameras in the hearing, then there won't be any cameras, and the public's better off having at least that than nothing. You know, and that's a easy argument to understand. So they began producing their own video. But in the meantime, that was the claim. When C-SPAN had their own cameras and controlled those camera angles, they claimed that even though all they were doing was shooting straight up video of what happened at a governmental proceeding, they said, well, we're the ones with the cameras, so we own the copyright. And that really is highly questionable. It's weird because, like I said, if the AP goes and takes still pictures, no one disputes that they own the still pictures. And all they're doing is taking pictures of a government proceeding, and they don't even, but it doesn't contain the record of the proceeding in the same way that video does. And that's perhaps the difference. Anyway, so C-SPAN did say that they had a property interest in one of those videos that she put up on the Gavel, the blog running out of the Speaker's office. So although C-SPAN carries public domain material from the House and Senate floors, C-SPAN itself shoots the hearings. And then I guess more from the New York Times at the time. A quote here from C-SPAN: "We are structurally burdened in terms of people's perception because we are the only network that has such a big chunk of public domain material," said Bruce Collins, the corporate vice president and general counsel of C-SPAN. He estimated that 5% to 15% of C-SPAN's programming is from the House and Senate floor, and thus publicly available. "It is perfectly understandable to me that people would be confused," he said. "They say, when a congressman says something on the floor, it is public domain. But when he walks down the street to a committee hearing or to give a speech and it's not public domain, but mostly the interesting thing is this doesn't really clarify it very much, or at least not very well in my view. It's the cameras and the control of the cameras that seem to have the most to do with it, right? Like this person says, 5 to 15% of C-SPAN's programming is from the House and Senate floor and thus publicly available. It should be viewed that way. But remember, what really is controlling it is it's because the cameras are government owned, right? Just up a little higher up in the piece here, and a different quote from the same New York Times piece, they point out that the House and Senate floor debates are government works shot by government-owned cameras and thus in the public domain. So what happens? All right, and then I'm going to repeat again that later on he says, a lot of our programming is from the House and Senate floor and thus publicly available. So is it because it's happening on the floor, or is it because it's being captured by government-owned, government-controlled cameras? Because it happened on the floor, right? The whole speaker vote happened on the floor, but they were shot with C-SPAN cameras because of the weird rule hiccup, et cetera, et cetera. So which is it? Because if it's on the House floor, then that was all public domain. But if it's because it was shot by government cameras, then all that awesome, cool camera angle work belongs to C-SPAN, or at least arguably belongs to C-SPAN. And that's problematic. And that's what I keep talking about. Anyway, C-SPAN, the article concludes here, had some YouTube gold in May 2007. Why? Stephen Colbert's speech to the White House Correspondents Association garnered 27 million views in 2 days. But C-SPAN insisted the video come down. What I think a lot of people don't understand, C-SPAN is a business, just like CNN is, Collins said. If we don't have a revenue stream, we wouldn't have 6 crews ready to cover congressional hearings. And that's a good point. And, a little easier to understand when it's the White House Correspondents Association dinner and it's happening elsewhere. It's not a governmental proceeding. They cover it because it's of interest, because it's government related, political, and C-SPAN views itself that way. And I don't dispute that they ought to have an ownership interest in that. But, another source of confusion. Apparently a lot of the people in the public find that, if I find the C-SPAN video of Stephen Colbert online, then that ought to be free public domain because it's C-SPAN, but it doesn't work that way. But neither does it work the way other people have been claiming it works over the past couple of days while they've been enjoying these new camera angles. All right, almost time for our first break, but let me get started in reading a little bit more. There's a little more information, a little more nuance in this blog entry, Library Law blog, and it is in fact at blog.librarylaw.com. So if you need to find this 2007 piece, Access to Government Information, What Has Been Learned from the Pelosi C-SPAN Debacle. And the article is, well, it begins here, from Raizel, Raizel. And I'm not entirely sure. I guess that's perhaps one of the bloggers or one of the readers. I don't know. But it reads this way. In the midst of many of the recent debates about copyright, including the YouTube/Viacom lawsuit, there has been a lack of discussion of two separate but overlapping issues: access to government publications and fair use. We haven't even gotten to that part yet. The Pelosi C-SPAN debate was a great example of how difficult it is to talk about the public domain and fair use effectively. House Speaker Pelosi, I gotta get rid of this. It didn't have the clock open, so all right, be quiet there. The mute button wasn't available to me. All right. The Pelosi C-SPAN debate was a great example of how difficult it is to talk about this stuff. Pelosi posted a minute of herself talking about global warming. I knew it was about that. At a congressional hearing taken from a C-SPAN broadcast, and was subsequently sent a takedown notice. So it wasn't just that the Republicans were playing mischief and trying to accuse her of copyright violations, but she was sent a takedown notice by C-SPAN. That is important, and that's what I think people don't remember very much about this confrontation, and why it's so difficult for me to just simply say, well, I'll just trust C-SPAN to be the good guys here. They sent the Speaker of the House a takedown notice for posting on her blog video of herself giving testimony carried by C-SPAN. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Yes, I'm going to read you some more, this time again from the Law Library blog. It's important to me that we get this information out there so that I'm not the only one dealing with this. Stephen Dennis, who is a tremendous asset to everyone as his role as a reporter on Capitol Hill and a prolific user of social media, and one who has made the transition, I think fully to Mastodon. At least I see that he provides all of the volume of content that he used to provide on Twitter on Mastodon these days. I don't know if he's cross-posting or whatever, but anyway. And everyone loves his Friday Night Zillow stuff. He's a good person and a good reporter and very knowledgeable, but he really, really enjoyed, for both, aesthetic reasons and reasons of reporting. This is a realistic, and honestly arrived at opinion that the C-SPAN coverage of the opening days of the 118th Congress was much, much better. And we hope it'll be like that forever. And it's frustrating. I don't think and he's not interested in losing control of the public domain nature of the filming. I think it would satisfy everyone if C-SPAN simply either relinquished its rights or was forced to relinquish its rights in the material, at least on the House floor, and I think probably in the committee rooms as well, but was still willing to shoot the video for us. Hey, if you're willing to agree to those terms, then sure, fine, great. Or I guess even, just as good would be what if they unmoored these cameras that they use for the government feed and hired some real videographers to run the cameras, and the government feed was better shot and better composed, both of which I think would satisfy everybody, except C-SPAN, who I think really wants to get a hold of the copyright and all this. Anyway, so I think this is largely unknown, this issue. And the more of us who know it, the less chance that something inadvertently stupid will happen, like we trade fun content for, losing control of the public domain here. Anyway, so as we left off here, it was the Pelosi C-SPAN debate was a great example of how difficult it is to talk about public domain and fair use effectively. House Speaker Pelosi posted a minute of herself talking about global warming at a congressional hearing, taken from a C-SPAN broadcast, and was subsequently sent a takedown notice. As Eric Goldman states, I don't know who Eric Goldman is, there's a link here, but he states, if our legislative leaders can't figure out what video they can recycle, how in the world can less trained lay people do so? And that's a good question, not mine, but it's a good question. Government works created by the U.S. federal government are not protected by copyright. That should be stated at the outset. Instead, these works, with limited exceptions for materials withheld for security, export control, and policy reasons, are in the public domain. Therefore, when a private publisher repackages these works, and that's really all that was happening here, they only have a copyright in what has been added. And this is where copyright law gets a little complicated. But I, went to law school and took a copyright law class, so it makes some sense, right? It's only kind of what they add. Or sometimes what you can do is you can claim it's a derivative work and that it's actually a new work in totality based on what you added to it, whether that is, and it's usually interpretation, analysis, etc. And there were certainly times when C-SPAN provided that, and that ought to be in their private, remain in their private copyright interest. But if it's just the proceedings, except there have been copyright cases, and you study these things in the copyright law school class, where they say, all right, well, we didn't change what was said, and it's still just a public record, kind of a public record of what was happening at the hearing, but we make choices about the composition of the shots, and these are artistic choices, and we should own the copyright in that. And it doesn't really work without the audio, of course. So, all right, this is a new derivative work that we own the rights to, even though the public has the right to a transcript or a video that might have been shot by a government camera left sitting on a desk somewhere. But that's not the way most people accessed video of congressional hearings. They had C-SPAN that was providing the coverage, and they were thankful for it. And there was no real market for going out and shooting the same hearing from different angles, but for public domain ownership. Not at the time, but then they had to create it in order to get out of this problem. So, government works created by the federal government are not protected by copyright. These works, with limited exceptions, are in the public domain. Therefore, when a private publisher repackages these works, they only have a copyright in what has been added. The little thing on the bottom that says C-SPAN. If the additions reach the copyright standards of originality and creativity, but they do not own the government work as a whole. So it still was never the case that C-SPAN could deny someone, say, access to a written transcript of what happened at the hearing. They didn't own the hearing. Obviously. I think it's obvious, maybe not. And incorrect claims of copyright in government publications and other public domain materials are rampant, and there are all sorts of links to examples of it. And here, an excerpt from something that I think attempts to illustrate that. William Patry, Patry, a copyright expert, states that, quote, any claim to copyright must meet the constitutional standard of originality. Regardless if C-SPAN's cameras are used, it's not the equipment, but the creative choices using the equipment that matters. And that complicates things when we talk about it. Well, really, it's the floor. No, really, it's the camera. No, really, it's the artistic choice. I don't know if anybody really knows for sure. You see how this becomes rather complicated. In the case of congressional hearings, 1 or 2 cameras shooting without editing falls far below the constitutional standard for original work. Like, just basically you say, all right, if you do enough original stuff to something, you might have created something new, and that's copyrightable. But if it's just 1 or 2 cameras shooting what's happening in the committee room, that's not really enough. But it's pretty nebulous, right? Anyway, so he says, in the case of 1 or 2 cameras shooting without editing, falls far below the constitutional standard. And as a longtime viewer of such hearings, I have yet to see one that I thought evidenced sufficient originality. Sufficient to carry copyright interest is what he means. After protests, C-SPAN did change their copyright policy, allowing for greater use of all congressional hearings and press briefings, federal agency hearings, and presidential events at the White House. However, this was a policy change internal to one company, but unfortunately not a congressionally set policy for congressional works or a legislative change clearly stating that the public is better served by having all publicly released congressional works available to the public, debates, reports, hearings, etc. And that's another layer of complication. People push back and they say, no, C-SPAN doesn't claim a copyright interest in a lot of these things that are very obviously government proceedings, even when they do control the cameras. And so you have nothing to worry about. And then, you have to be reminded, well, in 2007, when they were, caught up in a controversy, they agreed to escape from the controversy in the face of a newly elected and probably pretty powerful speaker. They opted not to make these claims, but it was always an option. And they could change their minds. Perhaps they're under different corporate leadership now. And they think that they might be able to find some advantage in a Republican-run House where they love to privatize what was once government-owned. And they might find that the current leadership of the House is amenable to their making copyright claims, even though it, usurps the power that Kevin McCarthy thinks he has by virtue of the awful trades and deals with the devil that he made. But whatever, we don't know for sure, and it hasn't been established, and it seems like an awful big risk to give away copyright ownership of government proceedings in exchange for what amounts to nice camera angles. So remember that after a little bit of wrangling, they sort of voluntarily said, we'll stop doing this. And we don't know how long that will last. By Congress not taking decisive action, limitations like C-SPAN's now former policy continue to limit how people are able to access government information. For example, and this is a different example, but a good one, and an important one, Congressional Research Service reports are in the public domain because they are, of course, government works, right? The people who write them are government employees. They're written at the request of different parts of the government, congressional staffers who ask for it, and congressional resources are used for publishing them. And in controversial enough fashion, they sometimes fit under some of those narrow exceptions where they aren't made available to the public for various reasons, because sometimes the subject matter content is itself classified, but they're produced for a congressional audience who has clearance to read them. But at any rate, there's the Congressional Research Service reports. Those are supposed to be in the public domain, yet the only comprehensive source of them all are for-profit organizations. At the time, it was very difficult to get a hold of a comprehensive collection of Congressional Research Service reports without subscribing to a for-profit service which collected them. They're disseminated, the ones that aren't classified, disseminated for free. Usually, though, you're only interested in picking up the ones that are, or ordering the ones, if you're working on Capitol Hill, that are relevant to something you're researching. And it was left to for-profit companies to realize, well, if I just go and pick up a copy of everyone that's released as they're released, I can build a database and then charge people for access to the database. And there, it's not that I'm charging you or asserting copyright in the information. It's that I'm giving you access to a searchable database that causes me to be able to charge you money and express an ownership interest in it. And it's a fine line. So let's see. Right. So the only comprehensive sources at the time were for-profits. And that was about the time that the the FAS, Federation of the Scientists. I mean, it's a scientific society where they said, we will provide the database. We know, we have people who are capable of doing this stuff and scanning all these reports and making a searchable database. So we're going to do it just as a public service. So anyway, right. CRS was only available through, for-profits rather, with limited reports available at a variety of different websites. For example, copyrights, fair use in reproduction and public display rights. That's the title of an important CRS report about this very subject. An important, and in light of the difficulty in obtaining, ironic report is only available for a fee. Again, only available for a fee to get copyrights, fair use in reproduction and public display rights. That is ironic. During the Pelosi C-SPAN debate, a member of the public decided to, quote, liberate many of the congressional hearings. Yes, and posting many clips on the Internet Archive. Instead of being condemned as copyright pirates and lawbreakers lumped in with the mass downloaders, those that make government information available and accessible should be commended. Then a blogging note here, see more after the jump for discussion about fair use. Even though I believe that even before C-SPAN's changed policy, the hearing recording was in the public domain, let's now assume that the material posted in Pelosi's website is copyrighted material. Let's tackle the fair use argument that Pelosi didn't use when she decided to comply with the takedown notice. Can you believe she actually did that? The 4 factors judges consider in fair use cases are, 1, the purpose and character of the use. And does everybody understand when I say the fair use cases? This is when somebody uses copyrighted or material that's claimed to have a copyright in it. And they say, well, and the law does provide for a fair use exception. And it wasn't entirely clear what that was supposed to mean. And here's the way you can decide whether your use was fair, or where judges will decide. You have to risk going to court and paying for a lawyer to convince judges to see things your way in this test. The 4 factors are, 1, the purpose and character of the use. For the Pelosi case, she proposes some proposed responses that Pelosi could have argued in order to defy the takedown order. Pelosi could say, well, I posted a portion of my own public testimony to the government about an issue that concerned the public on a governmental website to further inform the public. That's pretty good fair use stuff, right? In terms of the purpose and character of the use. The second test is, what was the nature of the copyrighted work? And she might respond, government testimony was the nature of the copyrighted work. Come on. Government testimony to the government by someone working in the government. Third, they ask, what is the amount and substantiality of the portion taken? To which she might respond, it was a minute or so of a particular congressional hearing, a small portion of the whole. And fourth, they ask, what is the effect on the use upon the potential market? Can you ruin the marketplace for copyrighted materials of this kind by claiming fair use all the time? And her response might be, well, C-SPAN likely does not have a large market for short portions of congressional hearings, yet hearings of videos are sold. So, we'll see. Based on the fair use factors, this seems to be a fair use on all 4 factors, and one even clearer than Wendy Seltzer's posting of the NFL's copyright notice. I don't recall why she was doing that, but there you go. Continued fear over copyright and fair use keeps us or kept us in 2007 from freely using information that belongs to us as citizens of the United States. So, that's real interesting, right? Well, it is to me anyway. And, we who like to get down in the weeds about this stuff. You see that in the past, C-SPAN has, hinted that they might be interested if they thought they could get away with it in claiming copyright in things that I think rightly, think of as public domain. And it worries me when they use a moment like this. It looks very much like a lobbying campaign that could have unintended consequences. They say, everybody enjoyed the camera angle, so we'll play on that. And everyone will say, yeah, these rules are stupid. They should let C-SPAN shoot this all the time. Well, if they do we lose control of the public domain nature of proceedings of Congress? And it's not an idle question. So that's why I decided to spend this much time on it. I think it's important that you know that. And I think that it's important that you join me in pushing back about it when you see it discussed online, because it's discussed online as if it was a no-brainer. And I don't know. It's not that, so I guess it's a brainer. I don't really know exactly what you would call it. But to come up with a better name for it, don't copyright it so that I can use it too. And let me know. But it's something worth thinking about. Probably not the direction you thought we were going to go this morning, because there's so many other things to talk about. And let's get some of them on the record. This one unrelated to things we've talked about yet, but I guess ought to be on the record as well. CNN reporting yesterday that Rudy Giuliani was subpoenaed amid special counsel investigation into Trump's fundraising. Caitlin Polentz and Sarah Murray reported for CNN. We'll give you a quick rundown on what happened there. I don't know if we need the whole article, but what was going on? Special counsel Jack Smith's team has subpoenaed Donald Trump's former attorney, Rudy Giuliani, asking him to turn over records to a federal grand jury as part of an investigation into the former president's fundraising following the 2020 election, according to a person familiar with the subpoena. We don't know who that person is. But the subpoena, which was sent out more than a month ago and has not been previously reported. So when you ask about questions like, well, who are these people who are familiar with the subpoena? The answer is, until yesterday, nobody, because it had been sent out a month earlier. The people familiar with the subpoena would either be in the DOJ, and there's no reason to have them talking at this point, or I guess people in Giuliani's operation who eventually have to respond. So limited choices about who could know about these subpoenas. The subpoena, which was sent more than a month ago and has not been previously reported, requests documents from Giuliani about payments he received around the 2020 election, when Giuliani filed numerous lawsuits on Trump's behalf contesting the election results, the person said. Prosecutors have also subpoenaed other witnesses who are close to Trump, asking specifically for documents related to disbursements from the Save America PAC, Trump's primary fundraising operation set up shortly after the 2020 election. According to other sources with insight into the probe, taken together, the subpoenas demonstrate prosecutors' growing interest in following the money after the 2020 election as part of their sweeping criminal probe around Trump's efforts to overturn his loss of the presidency. Save America was part of broader fundraising efforts by Trump and the Republican Party that raised more than $250 million after the election. Since then, the Political Action Committee has compensated several lawyers who now represent Trump and his allies in January 6th related investigations. The subpoenas to other witnesses, in addition to Giuliani, were sent in late December, according to the other sources. The information the prosecutors seek is still being collected, the sources said. With Giuliani, the investigators have prioritized getting financial information from him, one person said. The inquiry to Giuliani came from David Rody, R-O-D-Y, Rody, a former top prosecutor in New York who specializes in gang and conspiracy cases and is assisting Smith with examining a broader criminal conspiracy after the election, according to some of the sources. In response to being informed of CNN's reporting on Giuliani's subpoena, and asked for a statement, Ted Goodman, his advisor, said the mayor is unaware of the specific claims of this by this so-called anonymous source and therefore is not in a position to respond. A spokesperson for special counsel's office declined to comment. Representatives for Trump declined to comment. CNN previously reported that the Justice Department in September subpoenaed witnesses for financial details about the Save America PAC and that a portion of Smith's office would dig into possible financial and campaign contribution crimes. The Giuliani subpoena and other December subpoenas represent a new round of inquiry, now from Smith's office, which took shape over the holidays. The focus there, of course, on fundraising. After the election, Trump and Republican National Committee raked in millions of dollars as they told supporters the election was being stolen, marketing the fundraising effort as election defense. At the time, some officials working on the fundraising effort knew that Biden's electoral win was legitimate. Despite Trump's insistence it was fraudulent, the House Select Committee found in its own investigation. Smith's office hasn't brought any charges. Federal prosecutors in New York previously investigated Giuliani for activities in Ukraine during the Trump presidency. While that led to prosecutors accessing his electronic devices, they declined to charge him with any crime. Giuliani is likely to be a central figure in any probe of Trump's close political circles after the election. After serving as Trump's private attorney during the Mueller investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election, the former chief federal prosecutor and mayor of Manhattan, well, mayor of New York City entirely, right, dove into Trump's attempts to claim electoral victory. He unsuccessfully argued a case before a federal judge in Pennsylvania where Trump sought to throw out the popular vote and connected with state lawmakers as he tried to convince them of election fraud. In the weeks after the 2020 election, Giuliani also held freewheeling press conferences, repeating allegations that he never could prove. A Trump campaign attorney told the January 6th committee that Giuliani had asked to be paid $20,000 a day for his post-election work for Trump. The campaign declined to pay him that. I would too. According to Election and House Select Committee Public Records, best decision ever made by the Trump campaign. Subpoenas issued last year to a wide swath of Trump-connected witnesses also asked questions about the Save America PAC, including how its funds were used in 2020 and early 2021, and about Giuliani, as previously reported by CNN. Giuliani hasn't personally received distributions directly from the PAC, because they're trying to hide them, of course, according to a campaign finance records anyway. Yet his company, Giuliani Partners, was paid $63,400 for travel reimbursement by Trump's campaign in mid-December 2020. Giuliani's New York-based security company also received $76,500 in payments from another Trump-backed entity, the Make America Great Again PAC, also for travel expenses, in early of February of 2021, according to the records. In addition to the financial inquiry, Smith's office is also pursuing possible criminal cases around the Trump campaign's use of fake electors in battleground states and the pressure on Congress and then Vice President Mike Pence to overturn the election's results. In all of these schemes, Giuliani was a central player. In his House Select Committee testimony, Giuliani explained that his team, working with Trump, pivoted to focus on state legislatures that could block the election result after his attempts failed in the courts. The New York State Bar suspended him from practicing law because of his 2020 election efforts, and he's also facing an attorney discipline proceeding in Washington, D.C. He decided to answer some questions the House asked about his work for Trump after the election, citing confidentiality. He declined, not decided to answer. He declined to answer. That made more sense. Giuliani could try to make similar claims in the federal investigation, though the Justice Department has legal mechanisms in which it can try to overcome witness refusals to answer questions. And we'll have to leave it there because that's where CNN leaves it. But I wanted to just let you know what was developing with Rudy Giuliani, even if it wasn't exactly the juicy stuff that you were all waiting for. Okay. Let's see. Let me at least put this on the, well, maybe I should wait for the next segment to put this on the record, probably. And then, well, let's see. We can begin to read a little bit about this piece from the Washington Post. Philip Bumps and his view of what's going on in Brazil, and give us a little bit of time on Brazil before we take our second break. I thought an interesting perspective. On Saturday evening, former President Donald Trump spoke to a group of customers at his Mar-a-Lago event space. This is a little bit about him going off the rails, but really also about the fact that, look, we haven't put the hammer down on Trump, so the Brazilian fascists learned that they might be able to get away with whatever they wanted to do. So this is the sort of thing that Trump is up to personally these days. And again, at some point this becomes elder abuse, and they really just need to arrest the Trump children for allowing this to go on. He gives a speech on Saturday evening in which he says, Ashley Babbitt's mother was arrested yesterday because she was protesting the death of her daughter. This is how he would read it. Protesting her daughter, who's dead. But the death of her daughter is what she was protesting, I'm told. I'm told I could say it either way. Protesting her daughter being shot by a lunatic who's got a record of not so good. That's what a great expression. It's a Capitol Police officer, or was it a Secret Service agent? I can't remember which law enforcement organization he was working for, but to call him a lunatic is one thing. And then a record of not so good. But they shot her, and there was no reason other than, her forcing her way into the Capitol to murder members of Congress. We're not going to let this go on, Trump added to applause. These people are horrible, horrible people, and what they've done to protesters. They were protesting a stolen election. Now, some commentary, just for a few seconds before we leave for the break. Mickey Withoft, maybe, Babbitt's mother, was arrested Friday. That part is true. The second anniversary of the death of her daughter at the U.S. Capitol. The arrest was a symbolic one, apparently, as is not uncommon on Capitol Hill. You see those things every once in a while, people surrendering themselves for arrest on camera, right? A symbolic one, as is not uncommon on Capitol Hill, with Withoft and others blocking traffic. And according to a statement from police, Withoft having asked to be arrested. But where Trump is further from the mark is in his description of Babbitt's death. And I think you probably gleaned that for yourself. And we'll read a little bit more about why that's so annoying and disturbing as we return from this short break. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Of course, we were reading Philip Bump's piece about, connecting the continued Trump clown show up here with what was happening down in Brazil. And, where Trump was giving his speech on Saturday, lamenting the fate of poor Ashley Babbitt's mother, arrested just for protesting. She, of course, asked to be arrested as part of her protest. But where Trump was further from the mark in his description of Babbitt's death, you are by now certainly aware that Babbitt's shooting resulted from her being the first member of a large and violent mob to breach an internal window near the House floor on January 6, 2021. She was with a group that broke the window near where members of Congress had recently been evacuated, and immediately before she tried to step through, people nearby raised an alarm about a security officer who had drawn his weapon. Babbitt was shot once and died. In the 2 years since it occurred, Babbitt's death has been recast as an example not of the limited worst-case response to the Capitol riot, but as an inexplicable overreach by bloodthirsty government responders, as Trump seems to frame it. The riot has been downplayed and increasingly embraced as a response that maybe was over the top, but still aimed in the right direction. A third of Republicans now say, and this is independently of all the rest of the stuff worth reading, a third of Republicans now say that they at least somewhat approve of the Capitol takeover, according to YouGov polling. And the chart depicting that appears right below. There are two central reasons for this, one proactive and one responsive. The proactive reason is that there's an ongoing interest by Trump and others in his direct and expanded orbit to elevate the idea that the 2020 election results were suspect. Trump has the added incentive of downplaying the actions of the Capitol rioters because it therefore downplays his culpability in causing the riot. And, as always, there's a universe of people willing to amplify his arguments because he'll amplify those people right back. The reactive reason is more interesting. Because U.S. politics is so polarized and because there's so much attention, praise, and fundraising to be gleaned from casting the right's opponent, not all of them on the left, as dishonest, criminal set, as the dishonest criminal set, I see. Responses to the Capitol attack that were more forceful than shrugs were picked apart and derided as examples of anti-right overreach. The investigation into the riot undertaken by the House Select Committee over the past 2 years served as a perfect point of contrast for Trump's supporters, a thing they could attack and from which they could draw real and imagined points of criticism. Even Trump skeptics on the right were empowered to hold an anti-Trump position that was often functionally indistinguishable from a pro-Trump one. Less than 24 hours after Trump waved away the actions of the rioters at the Capitol, another group of people who had been fed misinformation about the results of a presidential election stormed another set of government buildings. This time, the riot unfolded in Brazil, where supporters of the ousted president, Jair Bolsonaro, attacked police and pushed into the seat of parliament and the offices of Bolsonaro's successor in a spate of violence distinguishable from January 6, 2021, only in that the omnipresent red, white, and blue of Trump's supporters was replaced with green and yellow. Bolsonaro's response to his loss mirrored Trump's, a close political ally when he was in office. The Brazilian president similarly primed his supporters to think that the results were suspect, despite the country's adopting voting mechanisms designed to increase public confidence in the results. After the loss, Bolsonaro, like Trump, refused to participate in events marking the transfer of power, instead decamping, again, like Trump, to Florida. When Bolsonaro lost, the American right quickly went to work elevating baseless and unproven claims about election fraud. The mechanisms Trump had helped streamline even before 2020 went to work in support of Bolsonaro. At times, the Brazilian president benefited from direct support from Trump's former team. The response to the unrest in Brazil was familiar. Former Trump advisor Stephen K.G.B. Bannon, who had frequently used his podcast to elevate claims about purported fraud, offered a Trumpian, "they were just protesting a stolen election" defense of the unrest on Monday morning. He's one of those who had consulted with Bolsonaro, naturally. Ali Alexander, who turned "Stop the Steal" into a lucrative post-2020 mantra, offered the same praise for the attack in Brazil as he did January 6th. Many other Republicans remained silent about the violence. The violence was boosted by activity on social media, including Twitter. In December, Twitter owner Elon Musk speculated that the platform's Brazil team had offered unfair advantage to Bolsonaro's competitor without offering evidence. A month before, just after the election in that country, Musk had fired a number of staffers from the Brazil office tasked with moderating content that included misinformation or incitements to violence. There's a lot of good tangents and threads being pulled together in this piece by Philip Bump. It has been obvious since the first hours after the Capitol riot that a large segment of the political right is sympathetic to non-democratic responses to transfers of power. You may recall that that a few months after the Capitol riot, there was a coup in Myanmar. Do you remember? In which the military pointed to claims of election fraud as a necessitating factor. A number of pro-Trump voices celebrated the uprising. When the House voted to condemn the action, 14 Republicans, mostly ones closely allied with Trump, voted against it. About a third of Republicans say that American patriots, quote, may have to resort to violence, unquote, to save America, about the same percentage as those who viewed the Capitol riot favorably in YouGov's polling this month. All of this overlaps. Trump hangers-on finding audiences for international conspiracy theorizing. The combination of Musk's just asking questions approach to conspiracy theories as he reduced the platform's ability to police dangerous right-wing content. The former U.S. president continuing to cast incarcerated January 6th defendants as victims, despite the seriousness of the charges they face. Casting Ashley Babbitt as an innocent martyr. There were anti-democratic efforts before Trump, but the violence in Brazil was obviously heavily flavored by the American right. It's a warning, not just to other countries, but to this one. The warning being, hang Trump already. Jeez. I mean, quite honestly, right? We'll say it because not enough people who worry about stuff like this are listening. But maybe they will later. Well, anyway, Brazilian law enforcement made hundreds of arrests of rioters, as did the federal government in the United States, in the years since January 6th, and it has been years. In the years since, though, those most responsible for the violence here have avoided serious repercussions, using the same communications pathways deployed to elevate fraud claims to dilute any shared sense of their culpability. Only a portion of the mob that day, low-level participants, have paid any price, with the high-level actors like Trump now engaged in an effort to cleanse even that stain. If you're Bolsonaro or one of his supporters, the lessons from January 6th might well have been, why not try? And it's a good point and a good question, and as much as Marcy Wheeler does to defend the notion that Merrick Garland is in fact still proceeding, but proceeding carefully, and that we'll all be glad one day that he did. Well, the answer is still the answer. There still has been no accountability for people at the top of that insurrection. It's just true. All right, let's see. I had set aside, or I had thought I set aside, but now I don't see it, and I'm going to go searching for it. But I think I saw, how can I find this most easily? I think I have to use a different search engine because of it being on Mastodon. We'll try a different one, and I'll see if I can find, I thought I saw something from Amanda Marcotte this morning that was of some relevance that we might be able to use here. But I also did, okay. That is slightly different in its approach. But that, and I also saw something that I retweeted this morning that I thought was relevant to this. And it's been floating around for a couple of days now. Well, maybe it's just one day. But I've seen it before, and I hadn't retweeted it earlier. Let me see if I can find it. Yes, right. So the tweet of Key Hinckley, K-E-E, Key Hinckley, who has, garnered some major attention for this one particular, toot. I hate using that word. But writing with respect to both January 6th and the Brazilian riot, these thoughts, which I think have probably occurred to a lot of you. So I thought I might share this. I keep seeing articles about people trying to violently overturn election results that use phrases like, quote, motivated by election lies. And this, I think, is a good point here. They aren't motivated by lies. They are motivated by not liking the result. Repeating the lies just makes them feel powerful because it makes them part of the grift. They think they're fooling people. Blaming the lies lulls us into thinking that this is an education or disinformation problem, which, if addressed, will eliminate the violence. These folks aren't deluded. They've learned from their leaders that violence and lying are the route to power. For most of my life, I thought these problems could be solved by education. I no longer do. As far as I can tell, about 30%, it turns out to be right, about 30% of the population believes that getting away with grifts and bullying people is itself proof of power and leadership that should be respected, worshipped, and emulated. We can't educate these folks. We can only build a society that ensures that they cannot gain control. Unfortunately, the entire human race has largely failed to do so, and we're suffering the consequences on a planetary scale. Every day we act as though they don't know that the elections were valid. Is a day we risk losing the fight for democracy, equality, and a stable environment. And that's kind of an interesting point and an interesting way of putting it. So the thing I had from Amanda Marcotte was of some interest, I think. Salon piece from today about murdery traitor Green and what she's doing. And now that she has aligned herself with Kevin McCarthy and tried to get the Freedom Caucus and other crazies with whom she had previously been aligned, and I guess still is aligned, to come across and shore up McCarthy for the speakership. And it seems a lot like maybe she and Matt Gaetz had worked out a good cop, bad cop routine, right? Or essentially she's working to bring people over to Kevin McCarthy's team in exchange for demands being met, of course. But her first round of demands were met, and so she agreed to sign on. And then the wink, wink, nudge, nudge play was, well, you guys keep making more demands for more goodies, and I'll be, by his side and trying to welcome you in. And, if he sees it's possible with me, he'll think it's possible with you too, and he'll just concede eventually. And then you pretend you're reluctant about it, but then you eventually vote for him or vote present. How's that? And I think that's the play. But what's going on here, as described in this headline, they use her real name here, Marjorie Taylor Greene, wants to be a mainstream Republican now. I'm not so sure, but she certainly wants to pretend. Anyway, sadly, the media will let it happen. This is not necessarily my theory of what she's doing, but I think it's a good one. And, Amanda Marcotte's theories are usually pretty sound. I thought I might air this one. Greene is walking the path laid by the Tea Party, in which today's extremists become tomorrow's new GOP, I like to say, GOP normal. So what's going on? The battle line over the speakership dreams of Kevin McCarthy was a cataclysmic event. The terms of the media's increasingly ineffective efforts to convey to news consumers what is actually going on. Most press coverage portrayed the struggle as one between a more moderate faction supporting McCarthy and a far-right splinter group who opposed him. In reality, however, the fight was merely showboating from a small group of trolls who wanted attention, with no real substance to any of the disagreements. Indeed, pro- and anti-McCarthy groups are in fierce agreement on nearly all major policy issues, including the question of whether democracy is a good thing and worth protecting. Both sides, believe it or not, believe it is not. And I added the believe it or not, but that was a mistake because it made it sound confusing. But both sides believe it is not worth protecting. For proof there's no real daylight between the two factions, look no further than the fact that the biggest Republican troll in the House, Representative who we know as murdery traitor Greene of Georgia, was on Kev's side from the get-go. Greene has become one of the most famous and powerful Republicans on Capitol Hill by sheer dint of her gleefully unapologetic fascism. She's one of the biggest apologists for Donald Trump's big lie and the violent insurrectionists who attempted to overthrow democracy on January 6th. She's a grade A conspiracy theorist who rode into Washington spouting QAnon nonsense. Once in office, she went straight for the third rail in American politics. Showy anti-Semitism, downplaying the Holocaust, raving about how Jews were setting wildfires with space lasers. She hits all the major stations of the conspiracy theory cross, from dismissing mass shootings as false flags, to vaccine denialism, to, naturally, 9/11 trutherism. She, of course, has also gotten that sweet, sweet attention for calling for the execution of her political opponents. But she's all for McCarthy because he is fine with all of this, despite his media image of moderation. Greene, who is a much savvier operator than the liberals constantly dunking on her would like to admit, clearly realizes that being on the always Kevin side of this fight opened up a golden opportunity. She can now rebrand herself as a mainstream Republican. With her shiny new committee assignments, complete with access to some of the most highly classified information in government, and her role as McCarthy's golden girl, Greene is set to remake herself into a respected figure on Capitol Hill. She'll be just as much a conspiracy theory kook as she ever was, but her new status as an elder statesman in the GOP will put an ennobling gloss on her lies, helping push them through the ever-credulous Beltway press. That Green is consciously rebranding herself became undeniable on Sunday when she distanced herself from QAnon during a Fox News interview, although she's done that before. Well, like a lot of people today, I had easily gotten sucked into some things I'd seen on the internet, she said when host Howard Kurtz asked her about QAnon, but that was something dealt with quickly, early on. I never campaigned on those things. That was not something I believed in. Well, pretty huge lie there. In one sense, these are easily debunked lies. Her involvement with the QAnon cult was not cursory, as she implies. She literally released a video prior to her election in which she argued, quote, "Now there's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to take this global cabal of Satan-worshipping pedophiles out, and I think we have the president to do it," unquote. Her social media endorsements of political violence were often rooted in the false accusations that Democrats are pedophiles who drink children's blood. But it's also true that, like many far-right conspiracy theorists, Green doesn't actually believe the vile things she says. Truth has no value to her. She just says whatever she thinks will benefit her politically. In the past, that was endorsing every cockamamie conspiracy theory she could, since doing so got attention and helped her fundraise, both of which helped make her very powerful within the GOP. Now that she's made a name for herself, she's shedding the QAnon association so she can access the next level of power, which is being treated like a respectable politician. Sadly, there's every reason to think this will work in a media environment where mainstream journalists are always eager to minimize the radicalism of Republicans and present them as normal politicians to the public. We saw this process happen with the Tea Party movement. In 2010, a bevy of Republican politicians got elected during this racist right-wing tantrum wave against President Barack Obama. At first, they got the "look at these weirdos" coverage that Green enjoys now, but it didn't take long for most of the Tea Partiers to reform their media images into middle-of-the-road politicians. Former Vice President Mike Pence, former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Representative Steve Scalise of Louisiana, former White House Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, Tim Scott of South Carolina. These are just a sampling of the politicians who rose to prominence aligned with the Tea Party movement, only to be converted in the media imagination into ordinary politicians, all without having to sacrifice their extremist views. In some cases, they obtained an unearned reputation as reasonable or moderate simply by flinching at how gross Donald Trump is, pretending they represented some check on his excesses, or by criticizing him publicly. McCarthy himself is a classic example of how much the mainstream press will conveniently forget when trying to dignify a Republican who initially broke into politics as a fire-breathing right-wing extremist. McCarthy obtained his high-status job in the GOP by playing footsie with the Tea Partiers who took out one of his predecessors, John Boehner. He managed to win the speakership through his slavish loyalty to Trump, including a willingness to vote to overturn the 2020 election. There is nothing moderate or normal about McCarthy. Still, due to a few opportunistic trolls on the Hill willing to paint him as a rhino, he gets to be treated not as the radical he is, but as a normal politician who is simply beset by fanatics. Green, no doubt, has seen this process of normalization and believes, correctly, that she can get in on it. She probably doesn't even have to give up some of her other bizarre beliefs, such as they are, regarding mass shootings or COVID-19. The press is so desperate for normal conservatives to cover that even the slightest nod toward rationality is read as permission to round up a Republican to the class of responsible politicians. Green has hit the limit of what she can do while being known as the kookiest member of Congress. She's ready to graduate to a real power player who gets flattering press coverage. If passed as predictor, she can expect to do so with a big assist from the mainstream media. Well, unfortunately true, and unfortunately Amanda's got it right once again. Thought I would share that with you. Let's see. Other things that we ought to get on the record? Well, there are two. One is about George Santos again, which is kind of important. And then maybe if we can get through that one quickly, we can set up for the last segment and see if Joan can join us and maybe bring the focus back to process and what's coming next with the Republican House and whether it'll even matter given that there's, of course, the Democratic-controlled Senate and, of course, Joe Biden in the White House. So here's the latest on the Santos thing. What the angle here on this one from CNBC, we were duped. How George Santos raised money from wealthy GOP donors while lying about his resume. Well, of course, we know that he did lie about his resume, and that was meant to bring in, both respect and money. But there's a little more about exactly who was duped and how. Well, let's see if we can race through it here. A member of George Santos's political team had a plan to raise money for the Republican congressman's campaign. And this is some plan. It gets right to it. Impersonate the chief of staff of now House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Wow. That's interesting. Wealthy donors received calls and emails from a man who said he was Dan Meyer, McCarthy's chief of staff during the 2020 and 2022 election cycles. Both times he ran, he did this. According to people familiar with the matter, his name was actually Sam Mealy, M-I-E-L-E, and he worked for Santos raising money for his campaign. According to one GOP donor who contributed to Santos's campaign, this financier and some others in the story declined to be named in order to speak freely about private discussions. The impersonation of the top House Republican's chief of staff adds to an emerging picture of a winning congressional campaign propelled by fabrications and questionable tactics, to say the least. Santos now finds himself in the sights of investigators and in danger of losing his political career even after he's been sworn into office. In raising money for his campaign, Santos fed donors the same falsehoods he gave voters, campaign fundraisers and others say. And that we already knew. But what about this impersonation thing? At private events with GOP donors and political leaders, Santos would flaunt or hint at key parts of his resume that turned out to be false, according to records and people familiar with the matter, whoever they may be. The Republican would also tout his business record that's now in question, including claims that he worked on Wall Street, as a way to encourage donors to contribute to his campaign, according to financiers and party operatives familiar with the matter. We were duped, said a Republican strategist close to GOP donors and the leadership of the Republican Jewish Coalition. The group banned Santos from future events after the revelation that the congressman falsely claimed to be Jewish. The lies and embellishments helped Santos and his allies raise nearly $3 million for his winning 2022 campaign to represent New York's 3rd District. The donations were spread between Santos's campaign, a pro-Santos leadership PAC, which is still amazing to me, and 2 joint fundraising committees that were created to bring in money for his campaign, his leadership PAC, and the Nassau County Republican Committee, according to Federal Election Commission filings. Some of the tactics deployed by campaign fundraisers have raised eyebrows among ethics and legal experts. Brendan Fisher, a deputy executive director of the watchdog, documented, and Robert McGuire, a research director at campaign ethics watchdog Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, each told CNBC that the impersonation of McCarthy's chief of staff could have broken the law. A person who misrepresented themselves as speaking on behalf of a candidate in order to raise money may have committed a criminal violation, and any other person who knowingly and willfully participated in the plan could also face criminal charges. Well, okay. Now here's where it gets a little bit more interesting. The Washington Times reported last month that one of Santos's staffers was impersonating Meyer, but didn't identify who it was. So, okay, last month. But, last month we all started to learn about Santos. But guess what? McCarthy's team first learned about a Santos staffer impersonating the Speaker's chief of staff in August of 2021, the Times wrote. The publication said the staffer would call donors pretending to be Meyer and send follow-up emails from a fake address. Kevin McCarthy has known that George Santos was raising money this way for 1.5 years. So all of the questions, well, why didn't the Democrats do this? I mean, I guess, how did this not leak to Democrats? I guess is a good question. But this should spark some fresh interest and fresh outrage. Kevin McCarthy has known about George Santos's most questionable fabrications for a year and a half and has done nothing. And then I guess he probably thought, oh, he'll probably lose and it won't become a problem. Then he won, and then he was like, well, he won, but I need every vote I can get, so I'll just stay quiet about it. It's amazing. Neither Santos nor anyone mentioned in this story has been charged with a crime. Santos's lawyer, oops, I've lost my place here, but I need to get the music starting here. But Santos's lawyer would not say when asked whether Santos knew, merely pretended to be McCarthy's chief of staff. Oh, it was all a mystery to me. I had never heard of it. Santos has said in interviews that he's only guilty of embellishing his resume. He never committed any crimes. He's apologized for embellishing his past. His attorney, Joe Murray, didn't respond to a follow-up request for comment, yada, yada, all that stuff. Anyway, you know about his embellishment of the past, but how about that? McCarthy has known for a year and a half. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Joan McCarter is here. She's interested in the George Santos story. We're all interested in the general George Santos story, in the sense that we hope it has a happy ending in which he's destroyed utterly. Not for him, a happy ending for us. But yeah, this is a new angle. I have not seen that really mentioned elsewhere, and I think that's kind of important. That the McCarthy would have known at least about this thing, which is pretty serious, and he should have taken extremely personally, but did not. That he was out there raising money just by calling around saying, "Hi, I'm Kevin McCarthy's chief of staff. You should support George Santos. Give me money." That's money out of McCarthy's pocket that he needed to buy votes with, and they didn't have it. But yeah, I don't know.
Now McCarthy knew about this.
Yeah.
McCarthy knew about this.
Right. I guess, yeah, the only thing I can say, it's not really a defense or anything, and I would never want to bother defending him, which is that he probably thought, this guy's nobody. He's going to lose. There's no reason to raise the alarm. He's just going to dupe some New York Republicans. Who cares about those guys anyway? They'll be out money, but he's got joint fundraising committees. Half of that money will still come to important people who know what they're doing. And then when he won, he probably thought, well, I hope none of this I don't know if he knew about the other stuff, but I hope none of this comes out. And it doesn't matter whether it comes out or not. I need his vote, so I'll swallow just about anything. But wow, so in addition to making bad deals to give people possibly committee gavels or free pass for their pet legislation to the House floor, he's even willing to accept not just that George Santos is a big liar and everybody looks funny at him and the party that accepts him, but that this guy raised the money he needed to win the race by saying Kevin McCarthy's chief of staff was doing this. It was amazing.
And McCarthy knew he was doing it.
Yeah. I got
Here's
other
your laugh
problems.
for the day.
Mm-hmm.
Tom Emmer, the GOP whip, said this morning that the deal they made to make McCarthy speaker will make him the, quote, strongest speaker in modern times.
Sure. How in the world? One, of course, 15 ballots isn't going to help you with that. But all the deals were, we want something that will weaken the speakership in favor of us.
Right.
So how does it make him the strongest speaker? It doesn't. It's just a thing we
because
say.
he stuck to it through 50
I guess that's
votes.
it. Right. He's got the strongest stomach of any speaker. Is it?
Just astounding. Just astounding.
He'll just say anything, I guess.
Also, apparently this morning they're coming out of their conference meeting. Steve Scalise just said, or would not, promise that the U.S. won't default on its debt.
Well, how can you, right?
So there goes the markets.
Yeah, that's something. Every time Steve Scalise does something like this or says something like this, and I think of, that moment where he was like, "Oh, please, please, please don't let me die," having been shot. And I'm just astonished that this is what you do with your second chance at life. Please, God, if you just save my life, I'll never, do what again?
Yeah.
Make the U.S. default, lie about people, steal their money, put them, off Social Security and make them die in the street. Thank God you let me have a second chance. I'm going to use it so well. It's a little, look, you hope everybody can survive these things. You don't pray for people to be gunned down. But it's just amazing that, you've been to the brink of the abyss here and you come back and say, well, I'm all right now. Screw the rest of you. We're going to see what we can do about getting the rest of you dead. So.
The only thing I can think is that they're out there saying all this stuff now, which is extremely damaging to the markets, to the economy. It's probably going to end up in another downgrading of the U.S. credit rating.
Mm-hmm. And I'll say, well, look what Biden did.
Somehow they think it hurts Biden.
Yeah, you did that. Like everybody goes up to the like gas pumps, right? Everybody's watching the U.S. credit, bond credit market, and there'll be lots of little machines you can put stickers on that said you did that, except no one will know. But yeah, in the end, it'll all, I guess, who knows, come crashing down, and they think
that it's going to hurt Biden, so this is why they'll do it. But
right.
Wow.
I mean, imagine crashing the world, if it in fact does, do these terrible things, crashing the world economy. And I'm just thinking about scenes out of Mad Max with people driving around going, what really bothered me was the credit rating, the president of the world, got thinking about that. That's what they'll be doing instead of, okay, fine.
And gosh, seems like the lame duck would have been a really good time to have dealt with the debt ceiling.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, one thing about it is that the one thing to Biden, Mr. Biden, you can deal with this.
Yeah.
If you will. If you will get over the idea that it's irresponsible to talk about making sure the debt ceiling isn't an issue anymore and just doing away with it. He's got to get over that.
Yeah, well.
He's got to get over it and just say, okay, we're doing whatever we need to do to make this not an issue.
I guess, they do have long experience with, it always works out in the end. But, they get crazier and crazier, and I don't know if the same circumstances apply. You could reach a deal with different people, but these are crazier people. And I don't know. And you don't want to find out.
They'll do anything. They will do anything.
Well, they also have a fairly strong contingent of people who say, that's not what's going to happen when we default. We will default. It's just, it won't be so bad. People will just be like, oh, it's just paper. Don't worry about it. It'll get fixed pretty soon. They view it like a government shutdown. We'll get back. But I don't know. It's never happened.
It's never happened. So. And it never happened because it's a scary thing to happen.
Yeah.
Because we've had responsible adults in charge of the government who said, we can't let this happen.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, I don't know.
The responsible adults are not in charge anymore.
I guess, that's the case. And they have weird ideas that they'll all survive it because all their money is in cryptocurrency or something. And the dollar will crash, but we'll still have cryptocurrency, which, it's still only interesting to have cryptocurrency because you can sell it for dollars later. So that you can buy things in real America. And, if
I think there's also the problem that many of them just don't comprehend what the debt ceiling is doing, what the national debt is, how it relates to the budgets and to the deficit. They think that it's just like a government shutdown.
I guess that may be.
Um,
But yeah, I don't think you're. I mean, I do think you're right that they don't connect it to. If I'm a deficit hawk, say,
right,
and say, well, tell you what does it do to the federal debt if you do default on it? If you get back online, right, and everything is propped up again, I mean, we enjoy preferential treatment and preferential interest rates because of our credit rating. Like if our credit rating is shot and American bonds are downgraded, the debt explodes beyond any hope of control.
Right.
Why don't you think about that? Well, I don't know. But
they
did you
also
say that was
think
a real
about,
thing?
that rescinding $70 billion to the IRS
yes, right.
is a good thing when it results in 115 billion more added to the deficit in the next 10 years. I mean, this is
from taxes
they're not
collected. No, they don't believe in it, and of course, I suppose that's really the proof that you need. That well, okay, they're not interested in the deficit. That's just a lever that they use to try to keep taxes lower or to lower or eliminate taxes so that you can keep more money if you're already rich. And here, right, same thing. We're going to cut the extra money for the IRS because we're angry at them either for turning over Trump's tax returns after a 4-year lawsuit or just taxing us in general.
For existing. Yeah.
So we don't want them to take our money. So we're going to, eliminate their ability to actually collect taxes fairly so that the people who have, lawyers who can help them cheat will continue to cheat. And the people who don't, I guess, then the IRS will say, we have to audit somebody in order to get some of these dollars. We'll have to audit people who don't have enough for lawyers, I guess.
Which is the way it's been for the last decade since the GOP gutted the IRS funding.
Right.
Yeah.
Which doesn't hurt their cause any because now they can go around and say even people who aren't wealthy are angry at the IRS because they're being audited for no reason. So it's a bit of a problem they created themselves in order to make people angry at the IRS.
Very much on purpose, yes. It's not a problem for them. It's not a bug, it's a feature.
Yeah. Wow. Well, what else is bothering you about these these crazy guys?
Well, I'm kind of curious about the 3-page addendum to the rules.
I haven't mentioned
secret.
this yet.
Whether or not it really exists, there are people, Republicans, who say they have seen it.
What
McCarthy
exactly
says
are we
it does
talking
not
about?
exist. It's not real.
That's
but if you go back to the floor debate over McCarthy's speakership, well, there wasn't debate. It was a series of nominating speeches and tirades.
Right.
You had the holdouts saying, we want to see this in writing. We want to see this in writing. It's in writing.
Okay.
There are, we don't know if it's 3 pages, we don't know if it's 4 pages. There is something in writing attached to the rules package that was McCarthy's promises to the maniacs, and no one knows what it is, except maybe a few people who saw it, who say they have seen it.
So some people deny that it exists, and some people say it does, but it's not.
McCarthy denies it exists, but yesterday during debate, who was it that said? Tom Cole, Rules Committee, and Rep. Kevin Calvert of California said they had seen it. I don't know if everybody has received a copy, said Calvert, but he said personally he is reviewing it. Now, did he say that because it makes him look like he's in on the inside and he's special and McCarthy shares this stuff with him, or did he really see it? Cole said he'd seen it.
Okay. And do they all agree it's 3 pages? I mean, that's some place to start. I don't know. Maybe.
Oh, Richard Hudson, the NRCC chair. He said he'd seen it, but what it doesn't do is promise actual chairmanships for specific members.
Okay.
No names, just representation on panels. But
all right. Well, I mean, It's purported to be just sort of a list of assumptions that they're going to make, or it's not part of the rules that they're hiding somehow. That wouldn't work.
No, because it has to be published, right? So what is this 3-page addendum? Is it a thing that is attached after the fact to the rules?
I don't know if it's attached at all.
I don't understand.
Right? Yeah, I
don't understand. But, I do know that, yes, Kevin McCarthy made a lot of promises to a lot of people who are not worthy of even serving in the House of Representatives, much less being seated on panels.
Yeah.
What was really interesting to me, too, was Tom Cole leading this debate yesterday, knowing, as chairman of the Rules Committee, that he is going to have 3 of these people now on his side in that committee.
Yeah,
and
have to deal with them.
This is absolutely fine. Going along with it.
Yeah, well, I guess, I don't know whether it's just he's accepted there's no way around it, or whether he thinks he's one of those people who think, I can control them, or whether he just, what's the big difference? We're just going to have a longer list of stupid amendments that will be in order, but dumb. And if dumbness bothered me, I wouldn't be here. So, I don't know. I'm not certain how he's going to react to that. And whether they'll find a way to work together as one team, or whether there'll be factions within the Rules Committee. And I suppose if you're not interested in legislating, maybe that's not the worst thing either. You can't get anything to the floor.
Yeah.
So, it's hard to tell.
Chaos in the Rules Committee potentially means less damage done on the actual floor.
Maybe. I mean, you're supposed to run that place like a tight ship for a reason.
Right. So if they can't agree on what comes to the floor, maybe stuff just isn't going to come to the floor, which really probably wouldn't be such a bad thing, given what they've put on the floor so far. And what they're planning on putting on the floor today.
Maybe. What's for
Jim
today?
Jordan's oversight of the oversight, or whatever it is his ridiculous.
I see. The weaponizing federal government
of the federal
subcommittee.
Government Committee that Jim Jordan is going to have sole control over.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
The only thing I can suggest is that anybody who receives a subpoena throws it in the trash.
Yeah, I guess. Well, recycle it.
That's what a Republican would do.
Yeah, that's true. They would not even recycle it. That's true. I mean, remember that in all likelihood, it will take them longer than the 118th Congress lasts to get you under their thumb anyway, even if they win. Right. And so you should roll the dice and see if the 119th Congress will reissue the subpoena. You can make it last 2 years.
Make them take you to court. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it'll cost you.
Make them do that work.
But
and they're probably not actually going to be committed to doing that work.
They might not. Yeah. I mean, again, the court precedents basically say, when the Congress is run by normal people anyway, you kind of do have to honor those subpoenas, but it doesn't stop them from doing it. Those precedents existed before they stopped going, and that's how long it takes to get a court to say, yes, we meant it the first time, second time, and third time we said it. And yes, even though your name isn't Donald Trump, you have to obey subpoenas. You got to go, even though Trump himself never did. But that's usually their claim. Well, these precedents you're pointing to are talking about other people with different names. Are you sure I have to go? Yes, you have to go. That's what law means. Oh, I don't know. I'll appeal that.
Yeah.
So we'll see how long that lasts. We'll see how long it takes them to get around to issuing subpoenas of any kind. Some of them are, the skids are greased. I did notice that the rules package spent, I thought, an inordinate amount of time authorizing individual actual bills and resolutions for floor activity. I don't know if I've seen that before or not, but special rules that they ordinarily attach to each bill to bring it to the floor were just rolled into the rules package. There was a whole section of special rules for different bills.
Yeah.
That was in there. I don't know if that was brand new. Have you ever seen that one? It may have happened before.
I don't remember seeing it before, but then again, because it never was that much of an issue, I didn't really pay attention to rules packages.
Yeah, it was usually
to this because they weren't banana
stuff.
pants.
Yeah, and they didn't do all these new investigative committees. The weaponization of the federal government one is particularly funny since they also passed, I forget the name that they used for the rule of, what's the name they attached it with an H?
The Holman rule.
Holman, that was it. So they can now target individual government employees for termination or elimination of their salary, which they'll do in between meetings of the committee to stop weaponizing the federal government. Sure. Okay. Well, we are just calls coming from inside the house.
Slideshow that was presented in the Republican conference meeting this morning.
Oh.
And here's the slide on budget of spending. Of course, I used PowerPoint. The last item: will not agree to debt limit increase without budget agreement or commensurate fiscal reforms.
Oh, well, at least they'll be commensurate.
Yes.
Whatever that means, but okay. That doesn't tell us much about what they're going to do, and I guess if somebody says, well, those are commensurate, that might be enough for them. But
yeah.
But of course, they may also say what would be commensurate is banning gay marriage. That would be commensurate. We're going to have that.
Yeah, they are Republicans. It could be that.
How could that possibly work? I don't know. There's space lasers, so this could be happening too. So
yeah, I think it's going to be more like Medicaid and Social Security and Medicare.
I think their first line response will at least have fiscal impact.
Yes.
But, somebody might that's at the end of the meeting. Gay marriage too. No. All right, I'm going to withhold my fine. Can't have anybody say that. I'm going to withhold my vote. But you're crazy. It has nothing to do with it. I'm going to tell my constituents you love gay marriage. Ugh. All right. Write that in. Somebody got a pen? Put it on the secret 3 pages so nobody sees that. I'm very interested to find out what that is. We'll have to wait and see.
I don't know if we
will
ever
find a description.
We'll hear. They'll brag
eventually.
If they're given something in those 3 pages. They'll maybe raise hell if they're not.
Yeah. So that might be our best shot of finding out.
Relying upon any Republican to raise hell about what other Republicans are doing is a fool's errand.
Oh, well, yeah.
They're just going to roll over for all of this, all of those rank and file Republican members who are not crazy.
Yes, so.
Even though it only takes half a dozen of them to say, bad idea. Maybe I'll vote with the Democrats on this one.
Well, we may see
it's early. It could happen.
Yeah. You never
Counting
know.
on a Republican to do the right thing, though.
Yeah, don't bet on it. I could
it
happen?
Stake the farm on that one.
Yeah, right. So, well, we'll see where it goes. I'm curious to find out what form this addendum has, and I'm guessing it just has to be. Well, these are the things that are going to be sort of tacitly understood about it. We won't put it in the rules. The rules will say that a committee is being formed, and I'll tell you now that I'm going to make, the recommendation that so-and-so is the chair, and you wanted to see it in writing. Here it is. It doesn't go in the rules package, and the reason it's a secret addendum is I only mean for Republicans to see it, but it's not being voted on. It's not being embodied in the rules, so you don't have to show it to anybody but Republicans. That's the only way I can think of there being such a thing, and denying its existence really means, well, I deny that it's part of the rules package, but it's the cover letter. When I send the rules to people, I intend to make this one and that one the chair. It's really fascinating to me how he's going to survive stuff like, other people who thought they were going to get the gavels, if this is the case, who don't. And who say, I voted for you every time. I don't understand why I don't get the gavel. And I'm giving it to the person who never voted for me. in some cases, that might be what happens. And I think that's why Mike Rogers wanted to kill Matt Gaetz.
Yes.
Which, it's understandable.
Yeah. I think he's probably not the only one.
Yeah. So I understand that, that some portion of the first round of fighting is going to be over whether or not they can protect their defense budget. And it's hard not to root for them accidentally falling into having to cut the defense budget, I guess. But
it's because they set the budget at FY 2022 levels pre the 1.7 trillion omnibus that passed for this year for the FY 23 budget. So that's like a 10% cut to defense, unless of course they steal it from everywhere else.
There's always that.
Which they would do.
Yep.
Which guarantees there's going to be a government shutdown because, yes, we still have a Democratic Senate that is not going to agree to everything that the House maniacs want. Something that the House maniacs still have not seemed to grasp or just want to ignore because so far ignoring all the rules and the way everything works in reality has worked for them. I mean...
They've never had to really deal with it because, they've never been in charge for.
They've never been in charge till now. Now they're in charge. Kevin McCarthy is not in charge. And we'll see the reality of a Senate that says, "Yeah, we're not going to do that." You're going to see the reality of a Republican Senate that says, "Yeah, on this one we're going to go with the Democrats because you people are crazy."
Yeah. I hope. It's
I
been
hope.
nice. Like for 2 years or so, we've only been having to joke, it's almost government shutdown time. But seriously, they're not gonna this time. But I guess now that respite is over.
There is essentially, they are already promising, essentially, without saying the words, that there will be a government shutdown.
It's very odd. And they spent the 2 years mostly saying, well, we're past that. We, as Republicans, even saying not only were they not in charge, but saying we understand that it's not good for us.
We're not going to do that. We won't go there.
Yeah. It's not good for us to have that. We lose when there's a government shutdown. Let's just, we'll make the best deal we can. And then they win control and they're immediately going to go to this. You said for 2 years that this was bad for you. I know, but that was a lie so that you would let us do it again. Oh. Well, had I known that, but we did know that, but I don't know. People do weird things, even when they know, like Kevin McCarthy.
Like Kevin McCarthy.
I know he's stealing money, saying he's my chief of staff. I don't care. So that is the most astonishing thing that has come to my attention today. Anything that's
it's up there with astonishing, yeah. And he's going to get away with it, and he's going to.
Oh, yes.
Oh Lord.
Yeah, well, that's just, we all just have to watch that and gasp and say, I can't believe it. But yeah, he's going to get away with it. There's nothing that they can come up with to do. I guess if for some reason they found themselves embarrassed, they could say, well, we're going to reprimand him. Might do that.
They're going to have a talking to with him.
Okay.
I think it was Scalise who said that this morning. We're going to talk to him about it.
Well, that's nice. It's nice to talk. That'll be interesting. I'd like to see what he has to say. They told me not to do it again. I don't know what sort of talking to there's going to be, but I guess you might want to have that and say, you have to be quiet now for 2 years because you're really screwing us up.
All you get to do is vote.
Yeah.
That's all.
But I guess they will give him committee assignments. I don't know. They don't have to.
They don't have to. So far, they haven't said anything yet about.
Yeah, maybe they would like to
stripping Schiff and. Who was the other person they were going to strip committee assignments from?
Oh, I don't know. Everybody, but I don't know why they're going to allow any Democrats to have committee assignments.
Yeah.
I don't want to give them that idea. But yeah, Schiff definitely was one of them. Swalwell, maybe?
Yes, it was Swalwell.
Okay. Well, sorry I reminded you, Republicans. Don't listen.
They haven't said anything about that yet, and I don't.
Okay.
Because most of their ire has been turned inward thus far. It seems like.
Yeah.
Including, primary threats already, according to Jamie Dupree, that he's seen. against Tony Gonzalez, who was the only person to vote against the rules package.
Okay.
Nancy Mace of South Carolina, who was complaining about the secret deals. Dan Crenshaw, who was also complaining about secret deals. Mike Rogers, who, well, we know what
almost
Mike
became
Rogers
our hero inadvertently. Yeah.
And Don Bacon, who, all of whom steadfastly stood by Kevin McCarthy. Rogers, was fighting Gates for McCarthy.
For McCarthy. Yes.
They're all up for primary challenges.
I guess so. Okay. And
which Kevin McCarthy can't interfere in because
right.
Because his pack stepped away.
That's true. And you know how easy it's going to be? Usually you would say, oh, well, it's not going to be easy to find credible primary challengers to some of these long-term...
They don't need to be credible.
Right. Now you just say they worked on Wall Street, invented the internet, and are constantly in space flight as well. And also, just make it up. And then it's okay to call and say, hi, I'm the McCarthy's chief of staff. You should support this guy. That's okay, too. So now you can just make a kit. Build your own Republican, I suppose. Well, good luck to you guys, except I mean bad luck by that. And, but real good luck to you. Thanks, Joan, for coming by.
You're welcome.
I actually mean it when I
talk to you. Documenting the atrocities is our new job.
Right. And, stay tuned for the secret 3 extra hours of the show later, where we'll reveal all. Thanks again, and we'll check in next week if the government still exists.
All right.
Great. See you then.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right. Well, we're still in limbo, waiting for the new computers to come in for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. There will be podcasts available, but no live West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. So, it's a lot easier to speak if you don't have to do it live, right? So, still true to the name. Looking forward to getting that new computer in and getting him back on the live next week.